the book of Esther began with a detailed explanation of the over-the-top extravagance involving a party that lasted for 6 months and a final week of drunken debauchery capped off with a demand that the king's beautiful wife, Vashti, parade in front of a bunch of drunk men wearing only her crown. And as you know, if you've been part of this series, she said no, which set off a panic that women all over the kingdom would refuse their husbands' demands too. The king agreed to issue an order that every man is master of his own house and banish the queen from the kingdom. And so to replace her, the king agreed to an extravagant plan involving a kingdom-wide search for beautiful women, all brought to the capital city for a year of beauty treatments before they met the king, and he made a final choice of the woman who pleased him the most. And he chose Hadassah, a young Jewish woman, also known by her Persian name, Esther. And her uncle Mordecai advised her not to reveal their Jewish identity. But there came a moment when it was just such a time when revelation was exactly what was needed. You see, there was a man named Haman, the highest official in the king's court, whose ego demanded that he be treated like the highest official in the king's court, which meant that everyone who passed by must bow in front of him. And Mordecai refused. So a furious and indignant Haman went to the king with information that there's a certain dangerous element in the kingdom. They're not like us, and they're plotting against you. It wasn't that there's a guy named Mordecai that hurt my feelings. And the payback, the revenge Haman sought, was Mordecai's execution by impaling him on the sharpened end of a 75-foot pole. Although in some translations he built a huge gallows to hang him. But just doing that wasn't enough. Well, not enough satisfaction. Haman wanted to kill all of Mordecai's people. Every Jew in a kingdom of 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. And he manipulated the king's fears and insecurities into an order issued on a specific date, a date chosen by throwing dice, known as Pur. On that date, everyone was ordered to kill their Jewish neighbors. Mordecai overheard these plans and got word of it to Esther, and she went right into action. She set a trap and lured Haman's ego right into it, which ended with Haman being impaled on the very pole Haman had erected for Mordecai. And Haman's wealth and position were given to Mordecai, and the plans to kill the Jews were averted, and evil was defeated. Almost. You see, that original order that Haman manipulated the king into issuing was still in effect. Esther begged the king to revoke it, but for whatever reason, the king wasn't allowed to change his mind even if he wanted to. Anything written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's royal ring can't be called back. And the only remedy he could suggest was to issue a mandate to be carried out that day. Losing my mind here. Losing my place, not my mind. The only remedy he could suggest was to issue a mandate to be carried out the day before. And he agreed to act fast. The king prepared letters to all 127 provinces in the alphabet and language of each people and sent it around on riders mounted on royal horses, born of mares bred to run fast. The order allowed Jews in each town to wipe out, kill, and destroy every army of any people or province that attacked them. So on that day, the capital city greeted Mordecai with shouts of joy, for it was a day of light and happiness and joy and honor. And he wore a large gold crown with a white and blue robe under his white and red-purple coat. And in every town where those riders mounted on royal horses arrived, it was a day of happiness and joy with feasts and celebrations, because the tables had been turned on their enemies. Haman's 10 sons were impaled just like their father. A few hundred others were killed, but all in all, it wasn't too bad. It was violent, but not a massacre. There were a few reports that there were those who did whatever they wanted to those who hated them. Sword blows, killing, destruction, so forth. But wait for it. At the end of the day, the king heard reports of what had happened. 500 people dead, the 10 sons of Haman impaled. And he asked Queen Esther, well, what do you want now? What can I give you? I'll do it. What's your desire? She said, let us do it tomorrow too. And nothing said of defense, which would seem reasonable, but rather, I guess you could say it was kind of a kill because you might be killed day, or a kill before you get killed day. All we know is at the end of a seemingly unnecessary second day, 75,000 of their neighbors lay dead. So 2 weeks ago, we recognized the strength of Vashti to say no to any more of the king's humiliating demands. And last week, we celebrated the creatively brilliant and risky strategy of Esther to say yes, just at the right time. And I love the story of Esther, right up until this not quite so happy ending. And the story is not universally loved. In fact, its placement in the Bible was very contentious and not accepted as canonical in Judaism until the 3rd century, and not until the 4th century in the Western Church, and not even until the 8th century in the Eastern Church. And Martin Luther said he wished it never existed, but perhaps not because of the 75,000 dead people. It's criticized because Esther's Jewish identity is more about her ethnicity than her religion, because there's nothing particularly religious about the book. There's no prayers. God is never mentioned. God is presumed, perhaps, but not named. Now, the Septuagint, that's the Greek version used by Catholics, well, they attempt to fix this problem with editing. So they insert 6 verses that speak about God more explicitly. Jews and Protestants follow the Masoretic text. That's the Hebrew version passed down by the rabbis, and in it, God's role is simply assumed. A hidden identity, perhaps like Esther's original intent. But I say, if there's going to be any editing, can't we just edit out the slaying of 75,000 innocent people and give ourselves a better ending? So my former church in Denver shared our building with a Jewish synagogue for 36 years. And the rabbi's office was just down the hall from mine. And our congregations enjoyed this unique interfaith opportunity, and we had things we did together every year. Well, Esther is the basis for the joyous annual celebration of Purim, with costumes and feasting and fun. And one year I asked him, well, what do you do with the dead 75,000 people? He said, they don't read that part. And he added, just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean it's right. And it is true. I mean, both progressive Christians and progressive Jews read the Bible seriously, not literally. We know that we are to ask questions of meaning. For example, Lot's wife didn't literally turn into a pillar of salt. But we might ask and reflect upon what happens when we look back. And Jonah didn't literally sit in the belly of a whale. So we might ask and reflect upon what might happen if we refuse our calling and were a literal Adam and Eve banished from a perfect Garden of Eden. We might ask and reflect upon, where do we come from? And why is the world full of such evil? And were 75,000 people killed by their neighbors over a slight to someone's ego? Or maybe we should ask, is it possible that such a thing might happen? And so we ask and reflect upon, why is the world filled with so much violence? And what can we do? So there are times we'd like a little payback, even crave a little revenge, just a little, right? Just a little. And if Esther ended with, and they all lived happily ever after, I wouldn't be challenged to explore this darker place, a secret I'd prefer not to reveal. That there are certain people I'd like to experience suffering from lies and deceit and manipulation. Yeah, let's just sit in this uncomfortable moment, right? There are, when you're honest. And wouldn't it be satisfying for those victims, targets of hate and violence, to get a little reversal of fortune like Esther for themselves? And yet, calm down, right? Hatred for hatred is just lazy. And it takes no effort to condemn. And so much criticism is unimaginative. Right? The harder work, the work of faith, is to imagine our way to love and to create ways to peace. And to move from the thoughts of they deserve to what we deserve together. If we were to all build together. As we have discovered throughout the summer and all the characters we have explored, every one of us are light and shadow. Every one of us is this complicated web of mixed intentions and motivations and hurt feelings and secret plots and cravings. And then, from that honesty, we can ask, who do we actually want to be? What is our aspiration? I've said many times, Christianity isn't a place we get to. Christianity is our aspiration on the way. And so how? So we're on this 40-day journey of prayer before the election. And today's prayer is by Sister Joan Chittister, who's one of the Benedictine Sisters of Erie in Pennsylvania, which is a community with whom I've spent a lot of time when I lived in Cleveland. And an excerpt of her prayer today speaks directly to this. Great God, who has told us, vengeance is mine, which really means vengeance is not yours. Save us from the vengeance in our hearts and the acid in our souls. Save us from our desire to hurt as we have been hurt, and to punish as we have been punished, and to terrorize as we have been terrorized. Give us the depth of soul, O God, to constrain our might, to resist the temptations of power, to attack the attackable, to understand that vengeance begets violence, to bring peace, not war, wherever we go. For you, O God, have been merciful to us. For you, O God, have been patient with us. For you, O God, have been gracious to us. And so may we be merciful and patient and gracious and trusting with these others, whom you also love. And this we ask through Jesus, who is the one without vengeance in his heart. So in 2018, right in the middle of this very polarizing, divisive era we're living through, Pope Francis articulated a prayerful challenge for people of faith. And I'm going to invite us to say it together. Creator, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is shouting, let us practice listening. Where there is confusion, let us inspire harmony. Where there is ambiguity, let us bring clarity. Where there is exclusion, let us offer solidarity. Where there is sensationalism, let us use sobriety. Where there is superficiality, let us raise real questions. Where there is prejudice, let us awaken trust. Where there is hostility, let us bring respect. Where there is falsehood, let us bring truth. Creator, make us instruments of your peace. There are parts of my life I would like to edit out. Anybody else think that? Yeah, there's parts of me I don't want to reveal, although occasionally they might be useful from the things that I've learned from it. Esther's not quite so happy ending then becomes more meaningful because it is just as truthful as our unedited story, which is joyful in our triumphs and painful in our failings, and mostly hopeful and plenty of messy, and always extravagantly over the top beloved. God, transform all these words and thoughts, both those spoken and those heard, into what we need for our journeys today.